topic 5. I think I will briefly hold the microphone and we'll be handing it off. So here we are at topic 5 already. It's hard to believe we have gone through 4 topics. One thing I want to say, we're on topic 5. Every topic includes food justice and equity. The way we've designed this process is that that is part of every topic as well as was standalone topic 1. So I just want to put that out there as a reminder that that is will be embedded in the objectives and strategies that we will be thinking about, and we have a whole set of principles that the group did adopt, and so keeping in mind topic 5 is we're also trying to reframe ourselves. Our wonderful colleague Kelly Kish will do some more talking later, is helping us use language, not food waste, but wasted food, so might keep catching ourselves on that. But tonight we're going to talk about topic 5, but to date we have hit on the first 4 topics. Each of the topical meetings includes presentation. Our research partners from the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network and other invited guests, when possible, share thematic information. We will then have some discussion about proposed objectives. We're calling these proposed because nothing is adopted until it's adopted, but our research partners have synthesized what they see based on the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact related to this topic. So that's our framing here. We have the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact that the city voluntarily signed on to and gives us a framework for the whole series of meetings. And so with that, we have some potential objectives that we'll talk about. Do these work, and do we want to propose any changes to those to frame what the city might do around each topic? And so tonight we will talk about the research available on the city-specific, county-specific information that we're really lucky to have here, distinct from many other cities with the efforts that have gone on. And thank you to Kate for the pre-meeting presentation. I hope people were able to catch some of that, because there was some data there that please feel free to put out on the table. We didn't have time to fit it all into the meeting presentation time, so we gave Kate a little bit more time on the front end, but I think that information will be available for people to include in consideration tonight. So we'll talk about how much food is wasted and how is the food that is wasted managed, and what we might do to address that. And we'll collect your insights about the objectives and potential strategies tonight. And we will do other outreach in addition to this meeting. And then in a month, after we do our fun get to know each other activities, we'll also have some time as a group of everybody who's here tonight is welcome to return, whether or not you're official voting food council member, to look at what we've gathered. Does this make sense? Do we want to further refine that? And then, of course, when we get to the next phase, we'll do some prioritization and much more input. But that is kind of the rhythm tonight. We will get the initial input, and then in a month, we'll look at what we've gotten and see what changes we want to make to that. So again, I guess you can't see the very top, but what is all this for? It is a 10-year roadmap for the city around food systems action, including climate change and local food economy. So we have Climate Action Plan. We want to have the food work be more robustly noted as far as what might have an impact on climate in relation to our work that the city could do to have an impact. Milan Urban Food Policy Pact was a pact of cities, and here, so keeping that frame in mind, City, Park Board, Food Council does by resolution advise City and Park Board, and as another institution, schools are a partner. So kind of with that frame of mind of what can the city do to make an impact here in alignment with the Policy Pact and other areas that might not show up in the Pact but be important. And so we'll have a set of objectives and strategies that will be ultimately adopted after the whole process. And again, a little bit more about the Pact, recommendations and tools for how the cities across the world can voluntarily, it's all voluntary, so we gotta make it work for us here. Do you want to take on the chart now, Dana? It's a good transition point for how we are then looking at all the impacts, and we'll do the work of trying to measure things.
Yes. So in the interest of
sustainability, we did not print all of these pages for every person, but we have, I think, about 8 copies. Also, after every meeting, we do post the slides on the Minneapolis Food Action Plan webpage, so they are available there for everybody. So if you want a copy tonight, I think we have enough to share. And if the preference is, I know we want to be sustainable, but it's really much easier to have something to write on, just let us know, and we can print more copies in the future. Just a lot of paper, so.
Great. So this is the framework that we've been using to guide all the meetings. So you see here that we have these topics, and each topic is associated with a different public meeting that we've been having every other month. So you see now we're on food waste, generation, and management. And then across the top here are all the outcomes that we discussed being important to address. So we have food justice and equity, we have greenhouse gas emissions, climate resilience, other environmental impacts, because there's land, there's water. We have health impacts, well-being, and economy. So as we start to think about food waste, tonight's topic, what are some actions or what are objectives that'll help us address not just one objective, but what are the multiple objectives that we might address? So this is just a framing of how we can think about the food system in a holistic way, both across the system, but as well as across outcomes. And so in terms of what we're trying to create with this plan, so first we start with objectives. So what exactly are we trying to improve? What is this broad direction that we want to go towards? Then under that is a target. So what's a metric for change? So maybe it's food waste diverted, or in the case of health, maybe it's improvement in diabetes rates, something of that nature where you can track towards a specific target. And then strategies are, what are broad approaches we will take to help reach these objectives? So these are more narrow than the objectives. And then beyond that would be action, so specific steps. And so the process of this is really meant to break it down so that we create actionable steps that are cohesively bringing us towards our objective. And so don't get bogged down in the differentiation of this. We'll return to this when we actually start to discuss. But this also is another visualization of it, where you can see that across all the topics, we have specific objectives or proposed objectives that we all discuss. And then under each objective, there are strategies and actions. So this is just another way to help visualize how this plan would come together across all the topics that we have. And so moving on to our topic tonight, so food waste generation and management. So what does that actually mean? So there's 2 components of this, right? So there's the generation. And so one thing I want to know, and Tamara alluded to this, so the term food waste is used pretty widely, but we're trying to coordinate with how the city talks about these terminologies. So thanks to Kelly Kish, she provided us with some of the definitions that how the city thinks about it. So there's 2 components of food waste, right? You have wasted food, so food that could have been eaten at one point that is sent for disposal. But you also have food scraps, right? So many people would eat an onion peel or banana peel. And so these are pits, peels, trimmings from food, and plate scraps that could not have been given to another person to eat. So when we think about actions, we want to think about both categories of this. And then the management aspect of it is what happens to the food waste once it's generated? Does it go to the landfill? Is it composted? Anaerobic digestion, donation? And so this whole topic thinks about the food waste generation and then what happens to it. So we want to think about sort of the balance of this part of the food system. And so I won't go into the details of this, but this just brings back to what Tamara said. So we are basing our objectives and our plans from the Milan Food Pact. So when we are coming up with draft proposed objectives, we start with the Milan Food Pact categories and indicators, and we start to think, what are objectives that would encompass all the indicators that Milan has that are relevant to food waste? And so these indicators, I think, are better viewed on the paper or afterwards to really dig into what some of these indicators are, but I'll just read one, for example. So in the category of what they call food waste, total annual volume of food losses and waste. So they have these indicators that they recommend tracking, and so we took this this sort of a, I guess, pile of indicators and said, well, what are objectives that encompass all of that? So in the case of food waste, so amongst all the topics, we've had two objectives. One that specifically speaks to food justice and equity, and then another one that speaks to the community as a whole. And so in the case of this topic, the proposed objectives, and you'll get a chance to respond to this. The first objective is to pursue strategies to prevent wasted food. So remember, wasted food is the food that could have been eaten but is thrown away. Prioritizing strategies that improve access to healthy and culturally relevant food for the underserved. So an example might be of food donations. The second objective, when food waste, so this includes wasted food and food scraps, is generated, employ management strategies to improve outcomes of environment, so greenhouse gas emissions, equity, and economy. So these, just to sort of park in your head as something you'll have a chance to respond to later on. And so we'll start by jumping into this question of how much wasted food and food scraps are actually generated. So I'm going to talk a little bit on kind of a national framing and why we even care about food waste, and then we're very lucky to have Kelly Kish here from the city, who's able to speak specifically to the Minneapolis context to help us get a sense of what food waste looks like in Minneapolis. So on a national scale, and these numbers come from the EPA and the USDA, about 30 to 40% of the US food supply is wasted. So that's about 218 pounds of food waste per person sent for disposal. And so these are national levels that they report based off of their specific methods. And so this is just meant to frame that a lot of food is being wasted. But again, we will come back to Minneapolis specific numbers. Yeah?
To be clear, so that's not food that's in the field still?
No, so this is the amount of food at retail and residential levels. So, yeah, so that's a good question.
Is it annual?
Yeah. And so, why do we care about this? Well, for one, we're wasting a lot of resources. So this comes from an organization called REFED. And they, in the US, food waste consumes 21% of all fresh water, 19% of all fertilizer, 18% of cropland, and represents 21% of landfill volume. So again, we're using a lot of resources to grow this food, but it's not necessarily being used for a productive use. As well as when you put food in landfill, the way it decomposes is it releases a lot of methane emissions, which create greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not just that you're wasting resources to grow the food, but then it's also releasing emissions in the landfill itself. And then this obviously results in a really inequitable distribution of food. Hunger is a massive issue in our country, and so you're wasting food, and so it's really resulting in it illustrates more an inequitable distribution of food. And then finally, there's obviously economic losses that are associated with this food loss. So the USDA estimates that on an annual basis, and so this number is a little bit dated, so from 2010, $161 billion worth of food was wasted. So again, just to illustrate why do we even care about this topic. And so this is really just meant to illustrate that food waste is occurring along the supply chain. But when we think about our city, the majority of our food waste in our city is occurring in retail and consumer levels. So some is occurring on the farm levels, and there is some agriculture in the city, but the majority of the food waste that's going to be generated in the city is going to be the retail to the consumer level. So as we think about actions, just to keep that in mind, that this waste is occurring all along the food supply chain. And then when we think about consumers and retail, what are the foods that are getting wasted? So this shows a composition of wasted food and food scraps in the US at the retail and the consumer level. So you notice that the fresh vegetables in general are being wasted more or have more scraps associated with them, and that kind of makes sense. You have the fruits, the vegetables, milk, dairy. Sugars also have a lot of waste associated with them. So this just gives, again, a very broad picture of what food waste looks like on a national level. And so now I'll hand it over to Kelly to talk about Minneapolis.
Okay, you guys are giving me way more credit than I deserve, but thank you. Solid waste and recycling at the city, just so we're all on the same page, we only handle residential waste. So what I'm going to talk about has absolutely nothing to do with the businesses or restaurants or any of that. We only handle residential. Amy's going to chat in a little bit about some of the bigger generators, the businesses and restaurants and those sorts of things. So in 2016, the county sorted 3 truckloads of Minneapolis residential trash, and the little map there shows the areas of the city where those truckloads came from. And they did that to see if meeting the state's recycling and composting goal was feasible. That's a whole nother presentation right there. But what we were able to extrapolate out of that is about 24 or 25% of what's in the garbage are things that are compostable. So that's, and then another 4.2% is going to be your yard waste. So that organics category does not only include food, it includes the compostable food service items and papers and a small portion of what they call super mix, which is stuff that's way too small to identify what it is. How the consultants came up with what percent is the compostable piece, I have no idea. But so what we've been able to extrapolate from this is about 22,000 tons of citywide, if you were to average this out for the whole city, 22,000 tons of food would be what is thrown away by residents each year in Minneapolis. Now that sort did not break out what portion of that was edible or not. And once these goes out, there is a link to that waste sort, so you guys can look at all this fun stuff for yourself. One other big important caveat, did I put it on the slide? No, I didn't. Okay, this sort was done as we started rolling out the organics program. So this does not include anyone who has a green card at their house right now. I think one portion of the Monday up in North Minneapolis had their carts starting to be delivered about a week or 2 weeks before this happened. So there's a slight chance that some people had started participating, but no organics collection was happening on a broad scale when they did this sort. So for diversion of organics residentially, we have 48% of our customers have opted in to the organics recycling program. Customers are people who are in buildings with 4 or fewer units by city ordinance, and then any other larger building who wants to opt into service. When we rolled out the program, the consultant who looked at what they thought would happen, they thought we'd see about a 40% participation rate, so we're doing very well. And we have more and more people signing up each and every day, especially once that message gets out there that it's really not that difficult once you get it set up, and that it doesn't cost anything more to sign up for it. We have collected 5,319 tons of organics in 2019. We just got those numbers about 3 hours ago, so thank you guys for being able to update the slides. Hold on. Oh yeah, so it's an increase of just under 500 tons. So not only are we continuing to see the increase in signups, but that is correlating into more of the food portion being diverted from the trash. And all of our trash, as you can see in the pie chart, goes to waste to energy. So it's not going into a landfill, it's not adding to the landfill volume, but wet stuff does not burn well. So making sure we're recuperating those nutrients out of the HERC facility in downtown provides many benefits environmentally that I'm not even here to talk about.
I'm curious if you're confident that that is in fact a diversion from what would have been other waste, or if the whole volume of waste might have increased in that.
We actually are, I haven't had time to dig into it yet, but overall waste generation does appear to be decreasing because our recycling facility said, hey, across the board we're seeing less stuff come in from Minneapolis and other customers. So I looked at that and so everything seems to be going down. And I, again, haven't correlated the drop of trash to an increase in organics yet, but I'll be looking at that here in the next couple weeks. We do have 9 organics drop-off sites around the city. 3 of those are paid for by neighborhood and community organizations. More organizations who want to do that can do that. It doesn't cost very much, but as our money for solid waste and recycling work comes from our ratepayers for the pickup service, we can't just go around adding drop-off sites for everyone who we don't receive any money from to do those activities. And then a big thing that I know a lot of our city council members are interested in, a lot of people who are in larger high-rise buildings really want, is to be able to have an organics program. And it's, you know, a battle with the landlord of that building to say, hey, we want to do this, and they say, no, we're not going to do that. So we're going to start looking at ways that, you know, say if 50% of the people in the building want it, you, landlord, must provide it. Some types of those strategies so that more people have the opportunity to divert their wasted food and food scraps. So, oh, yep.
With the multi-unit buildings, I live in like a 9-unit building. Is it something that we could get? Because I was told that it, like for buildings with like 4 or more units, that it just wasn't offered.
I think, do you want to answer it, Amy, or you want me to? Okay, so Hennepin County has grants for businesses and buildings to start programs, which would include yours. The first thing we say is, because we're not in the business of trying to take business from other haulers, is that we recommend you contact your existing hauler first. If they do not offer it, you can contact us. You can subscribe to organics only service through the city. The current rate is $18 a month for one 64-gallon cart picked up once a week. It is $9 for each additional cart. So it's really not that costly. The only billing mechanism we have is on the city utility bill or the water bill. So it has to be whoever's name is on that bill is the one who is able to sign the property up for the program. But you can sign up just for organics through our office. So another fun thing we do each spring is we dump truckloads of organics that have been picked up at the curb. We rip open every bag, we finger through every bag, and we pull out the things that should not be in there. We do this to, one, find out, you know, what is the most common contaminant, what are people not understanding shouldn't be going in here, how can we better educate about that, what % of contamination do we have in our program. But we also started pulling out back in 2017, I think was the first year we did it, food that could have been eaten. And you can tell there's a lot of it there. Potatoes and oranges or clementines thrown in that category, by far the most common item we found. I saw the most disgusting thing ever in my life this year. There was literally 15 pounds of raw chicken that I have no idea how long it was sitting in a bin, but that is a way, and get it dumped somewhere as far away as possible, because that was the worst smell I've ever smelled in my life. So, sorry for that. I will say, happy to report, contamination-wise, we have less than 1% contamination in the residential organics program. It is 0.68% both in 2019 and in 2018. That is, most other communities in the country who have residential programs don't even believe that's possible. I have invited them here to help us sort, and no one has taken me up on that yet. I do also seek volunteers for this year's sorts. It doesn't take very long. Amy's not doing it again? Anyway, the problem is once you've done it once, you don't ever want to do it again. So, except me for some strange reason. So as you can see on the slide, the edible food ranges between the 4 and 5 truckloads are between, you know, just about 2 and almost 8.5%. So it's a lot of food that, and I should also note that those are low, because when you're going through this, you're not going to pick up every baby carrot, or you're not going to capture every grain of rice, or, you know, these are lower than what the actual edible food would have been. But so it's a lot of things that we could have eaten that people are throwing away. And if you equate that out to the average, 3.57%, you know, it's almost 175, almost 200 tons a year of edible food that just Minneapolis residents are throwing away, or at least composting, sorry. So that is my little input here on what is happening at the city residential side of things. Am I transitioning? Oh, or wait, is this the talk break? Questions? Questions? Yes?
What prevents you?
I know Hennepin County is working on getting an anaerobic digester to produce more effective fuel for electricity. And I wonder what prevents you from doing that at this point?
So city side of things, we don't actually process anything. We have contractors who do the processing part of it. So we contract with Hennepin County for processing of garbage at HERC. We contract with a company called Specialized Environmental Technologies for processing or composting our yard waste and organics. I don't know if it's at a bigger level that the city doesn't want to take on that task itself, or maybe the city's waste of its own isn't enough to manage a big system like that. Do you want to talk at all about AD?
I'm Amy. I work with Hennepin County. So as you mentioned, Hennepin County is looking into developing an anaerobic digestion facility so that you can kind of think of it like a big stomach. So it's digesting and creating gas, and then you can compost what comes out of that. It's a few years down the road, probably 3 years or so before anything would be in place. I don't know, Kira, do you want to throw anything in?
I don't think I have anything to add.
Sure. So part of what we're doing with that is to expand the capacity to collect wasted food and food scraps. It's not to necessarily take it away from what's being composted, but to add to the whole management picture.
Okay, now I'm going to pass it over to...
Okay, great. Perfect. So we're going to stop here for our first discussion break to both process as well as respond to some of the things we just heard. So this is just again to bring back the process, the structure of the plan. So we have objectives, targets, strategies, and actions. So we're going to focus on the objectives. So this is the broadest sort of component of the plan. And to jog our memories, these are the two objectives that we have proposed in order to get your responses on. So pursue strategies to prevent wasted food, prioritizing strategies that improve access to healthy and culturally relevant food for the underserved. And when food waste, including wasted food and food scraps, is generated, employ management strategies to improve outcomes of environment, equity, and economy. So now, how is this sort of discussion session going to work? So it's going to be two parts. So you're about to get a worksheet, and you're going to have the opportunity to really look at this objective in detail and mark any changes or any additions, suggestions, or what you like to the objectives. And then we're going to have opportunities to discuss with those around you. So Maggie is passing out these sheets. Okay.
So that was a lot to digest. Get it? I'll be here all week. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now's your time to reflect and make your own recommendations, as well as coalesce and have further conversation. And so we prepared a couple of materials for you guys to just support the work that you're going to do. So it's a two-part process. For those of you who've been here before, same kind of deal. Part one is working solo. I'm your friendly facilitator and timekeeper, so I'll just keep an eye on the clock so you can just do your thing. And the first step in that is to review and refine the draft objectives. So the worksheet that you have, that's just white paper with black ink, black font, that's your homework that you'll work on solo. So that's got those objectives that Dana just walked you through. And what we're asking you to do is just follow the instructions on the worksheet. There's a side 1 and a side 2. So we want to make sure that you take some time to do both sides. We also ask, after you sort of provide your feedback and reaction to what's there, to take some time to also make your own suggestions about what else you might like to see. And you might make some suggestions based on things you're really interested in. You might make some suggestions based on what you've heard tonight. You may make some suggestions based on conversations you've had with other people. So we really want to hear too what you might add in addition to your reactions and suggestions for the 2 objectives. The other piece, this beautifully colored cheat sheet, this is in case you forgot what the difference is between a strategy and objective, because it's, 6:30 on I don't know what night it is it Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday night. So this is to help remind you what the definitions are. Page 2, same objectives that are on your worksheet, but here they are again. And then page 3, this is an example. So this is a little sort of cheat sheet to say, well, how would this really play out? Here's proposed objective 1, and then there would be some sample strategies. So if you're kind of trying to figure out the architecture or the connection between objectives and strategies, this little schematic here, it can be a helpful kind of prompt to remind you what the deal is. If none of this is helpful and you still have questions, all you have to do is raise your hand and we're here to help you. So I'm going to give you some time to do this work solo, and then we've got a part 2, which is getting together to do some discussion. So use your worksheet and cheat sheet, review the draft objectives and respond to the questions, suggest some additional objectives if you have some, and then we'll have a chance to talk together in small groups as well as talk in a large group a little bit later. If you have questions about the process, I'm going to encourage you all to get to work. Just raise your hand and I'll come over and see if I can help.
Thank you. And a quick reminder, we will talk about strategies in the next section. So even though that's there, we're going to hold that for later. And there was previous conversation, another meeting about measurable objectives. So just a reminder that we're going to come back to that. So when we think about these objectives, we are going to, in next phase, think about what that metric or target would be. We haven't included that now, but that will be thinking, when you're thinking about the objectives, that will be something we want to have be measurable in the ways we were talking about. We will love to collect, so please, if you are willing to share, we want to use this approach so we can get everybody's words in their own words.
So we'll use the feedback that you provide tonight to inform the development of this part of the food action plan that focuses on wasted food. Yep.
It's okay if we're talking, yeah.
Great. So I'll again just kind of give you a broad framing for this second half. So first we saw content about the wasted food and the food scraps that are generated. So now this second section is going to discuss a little bit more of, okay, so this waste is generated, what can we do with this waste? What is being done with this waste? So to give you a broad context, so the EPA has a broad goal of, they have a goal of for 2030, a reduction goal aims to reduce food waste going to landfills by 50% by 2030. So on a national level, there are these objectives. And so they have developed this EPA's food recovery hierarchy. And so this is meant to illustrate that there are a variety of different ways one can go about managing food waste, each of which has a different outcome, and each potentially has a different level of preference. So they're most preferred, and this is not to suggest that Minneapolis would have to adopt the same thing. It's more to just give, again, context for this broader discussion of food waste. So there's source reduction. So prevent food waste from even happening before we even need to do something with it. Then there's feed hungry people, feed animals, industrial uses, composting, and then finally incineration and landfill. So again, this just frames that there are multiple things we could do with this food waste, and this is how the EPA has listed them in order of preference. So now I will hand it over to Amy to discuss Hennepin County-wide management of organics.
Thanks, Dana. So this is just a chart for you to see. A lot of the organics that is collected and managed in Hennepin County is yard waste. So there's been a landfill ban on that in the state of Minnesota since the 90s. So that's been working on being captured for a long time. Food to hogs is about 20% of the organics that's managed, compost 15%, and the smallest portion is food that is donated. So, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so I can describe, so with yard waste, that waste is being composted at yard waste sites or industrial composting facilities. Food to hogs and animal feed is the collection, could be a collection of grains to be reprocessed into a feed, or it could be food that is collected and cooked and given to pigs. Or other times it can be collected and fed to, a lot of times, what is for cattle. So that's what the food to hog section encompasses. Good question. So the question was that Hennepin County manages that redistribution, and food to hogs and animal feed, the county doesn't really have much to do with. That's done on a business-to-business level. So a business will collect it, work directly with a farmer or a company that consolidates for farmers, because there are a couple of larger companies who will do the pickup. With composting, the county has a transfer site in Brooklyn Park where trucks can bring their organics for compost, and it's consolidated into a larger semi-truck. Kelly mentioned it earlier, and then it's taken to a compost site. The two sites the county uses are in Rosemount and Shakopee. That is a great question. I'm not sure. Kelly has an answer to that.
So this is from every year the county puts out a progress report. So the change in tons is from 2017 to 2018. So you can see how there has been an increase in certain management methods and then a decrease in others.
Right, and I'm not necessarily positive on why donation has suffered. Just throwing some things out there, it could be related to foodborne illnesses, because I know there's been a lot of, like, you had to throw a whole bunch of some produce away and then it couldn't be donated. But that's a good question. I can get back to you on that.
Where does that donation number come from?
I didn't do the reporting. That is a great question. We probably contact some of the larger donation organizations, and whatever they report to us is what we can report out.
So when you're talking about organics and donations, are these from like large retailers, or is it a combination of, I mean, every once in a while you hear about urban gardens that donate a certain amount. Are they included in this, or is it these big retailers that have excess?
My guess is that we're probably missing the small donations, but if it's an official organization that we have gotten a number from, so I would guess that it's missing a little bit at least. Any other questions? I know I'm here to represent it, but I didn't pull the report together. So this I can speak a lot more to because I've spent a lot of my last 2 years working on changes to the recycling and what's the source separation ordinance for the county. And starting January 1st, Happy New Year, businesses who are generating a lot of food waste or wasted food must collect that food. Thanks.
I wanted to know more too, but I didn't know exactly what you meant.
Yeah, so I can provide an overview because we have a lot of guests and a lot of new members. I have presented on it before, so this is generators in these sectors that we've picked out for being high food generators. It's part of their business. They have to produce 1 ton or more of trash per week or 8 cubic yards of trash service. And so that was to kind of pick a general size where it starts to make more economic sense to add this because it can cost more if you're a really small business.
I'm just wondering how this is going to be enforced.
Enforcement. So we are doing a combination of different methods on getting out there to figure out if people are in compliance with the ordinance or not. One of the methods we'll be using is having the food inspectors kind of be our eyes and ears and let us know what's going on. From that point, county staff will go out and do an inspection, take some information. Definitely this first year is really going to be education-based, helping people get into compliance. But we will have a fee structure. You can be cited for this if you're not doing it. You can.
Okay. And what's the penalty?
That fee structure is being finalized. You'll know.
So, for example, a caterer that has operations in both Hennepin County or Ramsey County, would this only affect their waste collection for their Hennepin County events, or is there a way to?
So that for a caterer, it would be a little bit different because if the location where they're preparing the food is not located in the county, then it wouldn't be regulated. But if they did have a location in the county, then that would be controlled. We're working on including event centers, so hopefully if that event center is in Hennepin County, then they would have the setup to collect it.
Is there any discussion about how the waste is being generated in these facilities? So for instance, if you go to a hospital or an elder care facility and you see what's on the plate of the patient or the resident, if you've had any experience in these places, just to one example, usually it's way more food than anybody would eat for starters. I mean, it's that kind of, I'm just wondering if culturally, are there conversations about this?
As a county, actually yesterday and tomorrow, my group has been meeting to work on a 3-year plan in terms of talking about wasting food and its prevention and donation. So we've done a lot of work with the collection, and this kind of culminates in making it really widespread. But working on that prevention piece is really important as well. So we hope to find some initiatives and start those conversations. Another thing I want to mention is that this is kind of the basics of what will happen, but actually written into the ordinance language, we do prioritize prevention and donation. So if your business says, hey, we've done a whole bunch of work so that we don't have any waste to compost, does that work? It could. Other questions? Yeah.
Would the cost of composting or doing the organics incentivize them to make better choices as far as what they're doing?
Yeah, so there are other incentives or rather disincentives involved in the waste system. It kind of is a factor of how much waste you're producing overall, but as a business, in Hennepin County, you're paying 38.5% tax on your trash, 0 on recycling organics.
Okay, so, sorry, I have a clarifying question about enforcement.
Okay, Minneapolis chocolate, what is it?
So you said that you're going to rely on the health inspectors to be eyes and ears, and is that Minneapolis health inspectors?
We're working with different cities. We don't have an agreement in place with Minneapolis as of yet. That conversation still needs to continue. So for those businesses that aren't covered by health inspectors, some of them are inspected at a state level or a different level that we're not working with. We will have inspections go out. We also have an anonymous reporting form. So if you worked for a company, you're really frustrated, hey, we're not doing this, you could let us know and then we'd get in touch with them. Or if you're a consumer and you go to a restaurant, you could say, hey, I don't think they're doing this. One important thing is that it's back of house, not front of house. So that's an important distinction to make because we know that it can be really complicated to collect things from the public when they're dealing with it. But if in Minneapolis, there are some restrictions. The policy for the green to go ordinance can impact if a business has to collect front of house. It's just not part of the county ordinance.
Great. And not to cut off the discussion, but we have to move on in the interest of time. We just heard, thank you, Amy. We've just heard from Amy on one way we could manage wasted food. And now we're going to hear about another way from Food Council member Mai, who also works for the city and is very familiar with the food donation program.
And so maybe she has
That's great. Tell me if you want me to switch sides.
Okay, so before I do start, does everybody have this food donation little pamphlet booklet? It's in the back. If you haven't, help yourself. If not, I will send a link to Tamara, and she can send it out to everybody. And so, food donation. So this document was created jointly with Hennepin County and Minneapolis, with guidance from many organizations who shared their information and journey in addressing food waste. So Minneapolis is involved because we inspect or regulate some of the listed licensed establishment up there, such as restaurants, hotels, schools, event centers, and healthcare. And so some of the perceived barriers that Hennepin County and Minneapolis came across was our liability concerns. Under the 1996 Good Samaritan Act, that act allowed donors to donate food in good faith to needy individuals. So the Good Samaritan Act would, allow that or, help with that liability concerns. And then also, the city just won't let us, just uncertainty about regulations in regard to perishable food that can be donated. And in this pamphlet, it shows, Hennepin County have great resources that can connect donors to those who are interested in donating to individual or organizations that are in need for food donations, perishable food donations. And another perceived barriers is that there are just unfamiliar, with new tax benefits. Donated food can, help with, they have tax benefits as well too. And some individuals or donors just haven't really thought about donating food. So some of those are some of the perceived barriers. So that form up there is an example of a food donation tracking form that the donor and receiver can utilize during their transportation or that time frame of food transportation. So an example or some example of food that can be donated are soups, sandwiches, parfait, or lasagna. But then keep in mind that for those food during transportation or donation, the Minnesota Food Code do still applies to the food temperature. So anything that is donated code should be held at 41 degrees or below, or anything that is donated hot should be held at 135 degrees or above. And then labeling. So for any donors or any food that are donated, it should be labeled properly. Should have the name of the food product or food item and the donor's name, as well as the address of the business that will be donating food. And it should also contain the statement that says donated food, not for resale. Yep. Any questions?
So I just want to add, this is a state requirement, not a city thing.
So this is basically Minneapolis. So Minneapolis, what Hennepin County, Minneapolis have eventually created jointly. So this is just an example. If the donor and the receiver wants to, just grab a book, open, just write down, when was the food prepared, what time was it, transported out, the temperature when it was transported, and then once the receiver do receive the food, they can just open up the book, write down the receiving temperature, and just kind of sign off as to who received it. Yeah. So that's just an example again.
Okay, 2 questions. So the only thing the state regulates is the temperature during transport, before and after, and then who turns this form in? Or does it not get turned in?
No, this is just for the donor and the receiver. It's just for their record if they do want to use it for, tax benefits and stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It seems like that's really such a misconception that people don't understand that they're not held liable.
Right, right.
I wonder if there's been like the restaurants have gotten notice from the government saying, please do this. We won't, you're not going to be held liable?
Sure, so I can speak for Minneapolis. So what the inspector have done before, or especially during big events like the Super Bowl, we do encourage the vendors to donate any food that hasn't been served to the public that are prepared but just haven't been served. Yep, so we do share with them the resources that are available.
We've all gotten a really rich education tonight on this issue of food waste, which hopefully helps all of you in what we're asking you to do. We're going to do another round of reflection, but first we're going to hand the microphone to you.
Yeah. Okay. Just to frame the next section that Maggie's going to introduce about thinking about actions and strategies. Here, real quick, is just a slide we've shown on every topic. What are some other cities doing so we can start to think about how maybe Minneapolis compares? So thinking about topic objectives, we have Los Angeles, improve food waste management practice. Austin, increase the amount of food diverted from landfills. We have Seattle, as food-related waste should be prevented, reused, or recycled. So just to give you an idea of some objectives of other cities, so kind of broad. Specific targets, Denver again always has a target, 50% reduction in tons of residential food waste collected by the city. We don't necessarily know why 50%, 57, but just to give you an idea of what some other cities are doing. Portland has the goal to reduce 90% of all landfill waste, specifically from farmers markets. So we might think about targets on specific waste generators like residents, commercial businesses, farmers markets. Then specific actions and strategies. So Austin wants to offer compost rebates, so monetary rebates to households and businesses who engage in composting. Seattle lists exploring the benefits of collecting garbage every other week while collecting food waste weekly to get in people's head, oh, we'll collect weekly, but your garbage is further out, to encourage people to compost more. So again, just to kind of get the brain going and thinking about, okay, what are some actions that might be applicable here? So.
And I think we've heard tonight that Minneapolis always does it better than every other place. So we have an idea of what other people are trying to do, but our job tonight is to figure out what we're gonna do, and we're gonna do it better. Just to remind us, we don't have to worry tonight about those targets. That's gonna be work a little bit later in the process, but we're gonna spend a little bit more time talking about those objectives and strategies. So what I'd like you to do is take a few minutes by yourself, now that you've heard a little bit more on the food waste, and see if there's any other further modifications that you'd like to add, either in terms of the objectives or adding some strategies now that you've heard some things that other cities are doing and what's going on in the county and the city. So take some time to do that yourself, and then we'll spend a little more time in reflection in small groups. So I'd like us to now circle up as a mega group. I work with food councils all over the US, and one of the things that people have to do when they're on a food council is become a content expert about everything, right? Because you're making decisions about all kinds of stuff, and it's so heartening to see how much amazing work is underway here already. So as you think about those strategies and actions in our food plan as a city, we've got a lot of great work to build on. We're not starting from the very beginning. So what I wanted to do is just have us a chance to, give us a chance to share insights with each other. And I'm going to invite you to respond to either one of the questions. So, you know, based on your work tonight, what you've heard, your conversation with your colleagues, what's becoming clear to you about the impacts that work around food waste or wasted food could have on Minneapolis's food system, related to the environment, related to equity, related to the economy? And we're also interested in hearing from all of you about what's going to be important for us to consider as we finalize this section on food waste of the Minneapolis Food Action Plan. So let's start with some folks that are interested in sharing what they think is becoming clear about the impacts that doing some real work on food waste could have for our city, especially around economy, equity, and the environment. Any thoughts? Yes?
We were just getting to that, and I don't know if this is at the strategy level, but what is like a community-based, home-based approach to food waste is really different than working with the airport and market and center and whatever. And so somehow really being clear about like the audience of the intervention and what that those strategies, is that at the objective level? And you talk about community-based work versus commercial.
Yeah, about scale and sort of who the targets are for doing this kind of work. Great, super interesting. Did you guys hear that in the back? Okay. Any other thoughts about what's becoming clear about the impacts? Economy, equity, and environment. Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking that there's a good potential for startup businesses if they had funding, if there could be like some kind of an incubator foundation that would do a revolving loan to start up businesses, because there's a lot of potential there.
And you mean businesses directly related to food waste?
Yes.
Yep, great.
I'm going to add one since I have the mic. I miss the microphone. So we were, just to your point, we were going through this food recovery hierarchy again, which was really useful for my thinking of like where it starts, where we can have the most impact. And the yellow section about industrial uses, we were like, what's that? And so one of the ways I thought about that would be helpful in reaching this objective is identifying new technologies and industrial uses. So I thought about like I don't know what this is all brand new to me, but like we have corn, right? We have corn shucks. Like what happens with all those corn shucks? Are they making them into shoes or what are they doing? So is there new technologies that we can explore? Because I think those are the types of things that the city could get behind.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. I think like talking about like there's a lot of things, there's a lot of possibilities for businesses, but I think what the city would struggle, well, I would struggle with, is just it's not enough to just have the business. That's a possibility, but the business has to be viable and have a use. You know, I think one of the things would be, you know, everyone in this room would say, oh, we can absolutely use more, I could use more compost. But is the compost we're currently producing being used? And so it's something of what do we need to regulate, and what would be, what kind of behaviors do we need to incentivize, or, you know, create this, or, you know, say this, you absolutely have to do this.
Great, so where are opportunities for real creativity and innovation, and how do we make sure they're feasible? Yes?
Well, I have two ideas. One is actually what this, I don't know what your name is, Heather had mentioned about potential for new businesses if in fact you wanted to capture some of the fruits and vegetables that, for instance, retail has excess. And they do, and it ends up being, you know, tossed in the garbage. Then that could be used to actually cook food, prepare food, and for soups, for sauces, the sorts of things that you can do with fruits and vegetables, especially if they are not perfect anymore. I mean, if you run a household, you're managing your food out of your refrigerator in such a way that if your vegetable isn't perfect anymore, you can still toss it in the soup that you're making.
So
that sort of thing.
opportunities for value-added processing.
Exactly.
Yep, and you
Right.
said there was a second one?
The second one is, in terms of industrial uses, I just want to say that we can't count on the industrial food system anymore. And so to come up with good uses for corn is just not a good idea. We already have good uses for corn, like ethanol, which is a completely unsustainable business. So I think we need to be thinking way beyond, are we going to be having industrial food systems anymore? They're going to die in the next 20 years just because of the way they run.
So we've got some differing perspectives on the uses of which commodities and products. We have to wrap things up, and Tamara's got a couple of announcements to make. So Ms. Amy, I'm going to give you the last comment of the evening before we turn it over to Tamara.
Wonderful, thanks. I just wanted to say, being kind of immersed in this content all the time, I'm aware that there are a lot of things happening. So it's clear that people just need to know what's happening so we can really use what's already out there and find ways to make it work for our community. I also want to say something quick. I do have flyers that we sent out. One is a how to comply guide, and then one is one we sent maybe today. It's a single pager on the ordinance. So if you want to grab one, stop over here.
Thanks so much to all of you for your feedback. Before I turn it over to Tamara, I just want to remind you that we would like to collect all of your worksheets. This feedback and broader stakeholder engagement on this topic through a variety of pathways is what will form the content of this topic area in the Food Action Plan. So we want to make sure we get those worksheets because your perspectives are what will shape the content. Tamara?
Yes, and on that note, we are doing community outreach still on these topics. So if you have a place where you would like to host a conversation to gather more input, please let us know. We are, there will be a focus group type of community conversation happening. If you have not made a referral for that, we want to make sure that we get people invites to participate and go into the community where we need to on this topic. So those of you that are working in the field and maybe haven't heard from us or waited, we want to make sure that we're getting to the people who have got important insights that aren't here tonight. Two other really quick, big announcements. Neighborhood and community relations area of the city hosts an annual Community Connections Conference. It's coming up on February 1st. We will have a Food Action Plan workshop there in the afternoon. if you want to help co-present, let me know. We will have at least a couple of us there confirmed, but we'd be happy to have co-presenters, as well as if anybody wants to help table, we will have a sustainability office table, as that's the office we are programmed out of. But if we have enough interest in tabling, we could try to lobby to get a bigger part of the table or another space. So please let me know if any of you have interest in helping table, and either way, get the word out. We'll give you some materials so you can put the invite out to the community about our input workshop in the afternoon session.
So you got that on the website?
It will be. We just got the confirmation about it. I put it in the newsletter a day or two ago, but we'll get it out in other ways too. It's been a dynamic situation with information updates. Very quickly also, we just learned there's some interest in potentially reviewing the existing pollinator-friendly city resolution that Minneapolis has, and if there's any interested Food Council members who would like to be involved in looking at language to help strengthen that, maybe into an ordinance. We're interested in getting any community members to come forward who'd like to help in that effort. So we don't have a working group structure right now, but so if there's an individual member, let me know and we can connect you to that effort, and I can share more information. City has a pollinator-friendly city resolution. An ordinance would have more strength, and so Councilmember Cam Gordon and potentially other council members would be looking at sponsoring changes to actually make that a stronger situation for us with pollinators and pesticides. The language is something, I will send an email out as well so people have a link to the actual resolution language. It discourages pesticide use, encourages pollinator-friendly practices, but it's encouraging and discouraging and not enforcing really. So there are some state rules that have some constraints that we have to deal with on pesticides. So that's part of it. All right, that's all I got.
With that, thank you everybody for coming. Is there a motion? I'm So we've got Siobhan, Councilor Schrader. All in favor? All opposed?